What's going on, everybody, and welcome back. So a little bummed out today as I had to scrap this Wootz Bowie knife I'm working on due to a really nasty warp. So anyways, and I also wasn't really happy with my false edge. I don't want it to be as low, I want it to be a little higher, but this, this is a Wootz knife. So I figured, why not go ahead and put an edge on this and test it out for you guys. So I gotta add this part into the video because there's some important things I forgot to explain, and I did just receive the chemistry analysis of this steel, and I'm gonna share that. So I suggest you listen to this part because if you just skip ahead, there's some things you just won't understand. Now, before anybody comments about carbide tipped hammers, yes, I have one. Yes, I use one on this blade. Not a fan of that process. I'll probably never use one of those again. I will just fix my warps in the temper like I've always done. But anyways, that's not important. That's not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is the chemistry of this steel. Now, this chemistry is very close to historical Wootz. And what I mean by that is it has an addition of phosphorus. Now, Wootz was all over the place in chemistry. It was all over the place in alloying contents. So to say, this isn't Wootz, but this is Wootz, it's just really not true. There was an addition of phosphorus, and I'll insert a picture of some historical material that has been analyzed. Now, I found this picture online a while ago. I can't remember where I found it, but I do believe it was in parts per million at one point, and it's been converted, and they kind of dumbed down the alloying content. But if you look at the carbon content and the phosphorus content, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Now, even katanas had additions of phosphorus. Some were really high and some were really low. And there is writings about Wootz swords being very brittle and breaking and cold shorting, very brittle in cold weather. Now, the reason I bring this up is because, Wootz is not some magical material, okay? There's people out there that think this stuff is just magical. Same kind of people that think katanas are something special and are super magical, and that's just not the case. Wootz is, if done right, is basically 1080 with maybe a little more slicing characteristics, but I'm sure that could be debatable. Now, before we get any further, I'm going to go ahead and insert a picture of the chemistry analysis. All right, so here's the chemistry of the steel. And if you notice, the alloying content or carbide forming elements are very low, and that's what I like to see. Now, carbon content is in a good range, although it's not what I calculated. I calculated for 1.6% carbon, but I did have an issue with this melt, as I had a piece of my sorrel metal above my glass in the beginning of the melt, so I suspected oxidized and I lost some carbon there. Also, this was an open melt, and the last one that I'll ever do, as the most recent melts I've done are all sealed and look like this. I believe that to be a better method for achieving cleaner steel and getting closer to exact calculations. But still, the proof is in the pudding here with this analysis. Now, if you look at the phosphorus content, it's right at 0.08% phosphorus. It's also worth looking at the manganese content. It's essentially free of manganese. And it's worth noting that Wootz is a shallow hardening steel. It has a very low hardenability, but can achieve really beautiful hamones. And here's a blade I recently completed in which I achieved a really nice hamone. Now, not all modern steels are free of phosphorus, but if you look at a lot of hyper-eutectoid steels that we use to make knives out of, like 52100 for instance, I believe it's at 0.025%, and 1080 is like 0.04%. But you can get online and look up chemistries of knife steels and see that they have additions of phosphorus as well. But there gets to be a certain amount that becomes detrimental. Phosphorus can be your friend and your enemy. It's like a friend that'll stab you in the back. And what I mean by that is it can be your friend in the sense that it can enhance the pattern in your steel. Now, just because you have phosphorus in your steel doesn't mean you're going to magically get this pattern. That's not how it works. It's the whole process that has to be done correctly. And it can be your enemy, as in it can be detrimental to performance characteristics. Now, the performance detriments I'm talking about is what's known as temper embrittlement and cold shorting. Now, temper embrittlement is say when we're tempering a blade in an oven for a long duration. Phosphorus will move to the grain boundaries and create fracture points, creating a brittle blade. And it'll do the same thing in cold weather, hence the name cold short. I believe I stated earlier that there are writings about Wootz blades breaking and being very brittle in cold weather. Now, that's not to say there's ways to mitigate that brittleness through certain heat treating characteristics. I'm sure some ancient smiths had their ways around it, but I think 0.08% phosphorus is pretty much pushing it. That's pretty much the limit. Any more than that, and I really don't think there's a way around it. I found something that works for me. Not really going to get into that, but something else that's really interesting is that analysis actually came from Larry Thomas. I sent him a bar of Wootz not too long ago, so really curious to see what he comes up with. He's going to be doing some performance tests, and I wanted to make sure that I sent him a bar of something that was very, historically accurate. So I'm really curious to see what he comes up with. I don't know if he's going to be making a video on it, but we'll see what happens. So stay tuned. I'm going to step over here to my grinders, and I'll be putting Dennis Tyrell's sharpening jig on my broadbeck and put an edge on this thing. Okay, so I'll cut some really thin paper here. Okay, cuts paper, big deal. Now we'll cut some cardboard tubing. Now I'm going to perform an edge flex test. And what I'm doing is putting quite a bit of pressure down on that edge as I move it across the brass rod, basically trying to get that edge to chip. Now, what I'm looking for is that edge to come back to true as it deforms or flexes over the contour of the brass rod and no edge chipping. What you don't want to see is the edge chipped out or any permanent deformities. And this is a great test because it subjects the edge to an extreme condition and tells you that your heat treat is on point, especially for this chemistry. So I went ahead and sped this footage up. I really just didn't want to have a long, boring clip of me hacking away at this board, although it was really fun. And I did start chopping the other end, forgot to hit the record button. But I'm more than confident I could have hacked through that whole board and that edge still would have been shaven sharp. And something worth mentioning is, you don't need to have phosphorus in your steel to achieve really nice patterns. I can achieve beautiful patterns without any phosphorus. Like I mentioned, I just, wanted to make something that I felt was more in the historical Wootz realm for this blade and the steel that I sent Laren. And you can squeeze more performance out of your Wootz, with very little phosphorus. Maybe add a little bit more manganese. Maybe just a little bit more alloying elements or, a little more of a specific carbide forming element, which is what I do with my hunting knives. I have very low amounts of phosphorus, and I just add a little bit more manganese and keep the alloying content low. And Peter Burt actually has some really good videos of testing some Wootz blades with no phosphorus and a blade with phosphorus. He basically just takes it through an ABS test. So really good video there. But yeah, stay tuned. See if I can get it to shave. Yeah, it's still shaved sharp. If you can tell. Here's a close-up picture of the edge under the stereoscope. And this is the area of the edge that was mostly used during the chopping test. And it's the best image I could get as it was pretty difficult to take a picture through the lens. And what I'm looking for is any micro fractures or micro chipping, and everything looks pretty good. Now let's look at the pattern under the microscope. Well, here's the pattern under the microscope, and I've literally just laid the blade on the stage. And what you're seeing is all the little carbide clusters aligned in sheets. which is pretty cool. It's pretty interesting. You know, this is what makes Wootz so indifferent. And for those that don't know, Wootz is a mono steel. It's not layered, even though it looks layered, but this is why it looks layered, is all these carbide particles. And I sped this footage up, but so as I change lenses, I have to adjust. But here's a closer look at the carbide clusters. And you can see how it's all in sheets. And, you know, exactly how that happens, nobody really knows yet. But here's a pretty cool close-up of little carbide clusters, also known as cementite. So, yeah, pretty cool. Okay, so I'm gonna hack into this brass rod and see what kind of damage it does to the edge, if any at all. I suspect there'll be some damage, but let's see what happens. Oh, yeah, major damage. Major. Now, knives aren't intended to do this, and this is hard on a knife edge. And I could have put more meat behind the edge, but what's the point of having a chisel for a knife? Now, the fractures that occur, I believe, are probably a result of plate martensite over any brittleness, as the edge flex test proved otherwise. Now, there's much more high-performing steels out there, especially particle metallurgical steels, that would cut through that rod like butter. I know for a fact I can make a blade from 52-100 that would cut that brass rod with ease, but that's a superior steel. I completely spaced out doing a Rockwell test, and I wish I would have did it early on before I broke this blade into pieces. But this 60 file is barely biting, so I think it's safe to say I'm between 60 and 61 Rockwell. Here's the grain structure, which is nice and tight. That's what you want to see. So I took the same piece and looked at it under the microscope, and I found something interesting. All the little white speckles you see there, well, that's carbide. I thought that was pretty cool. Well, that's going to conclude this video. This blade is in pieces now, which is kind of a bummer, but it is what it is. I think I'm going to start collecting all my failures, and one day I will melt it all down into an ingot and make a blade out of it, but hopefully I don't have that many failures. Now, the whole takeaway of this video is how I mitigated the amount of phosphorus that's in this steel. And I think I did a very good job at doing that. I think this blade performed very well for the amount of phosphorus that's in it. Happy with the results. Also, I plan on doing another performance test video, not as in-depth as this one, but it will be with a phosphorus blade and a non-phosphorus blade that I put through standard ABS testing. And I'm almost done with this wrought iron multi-bar blade, and that video will be out soon. So if you have any questions, just ask in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks for watching and take care.